Welcome to Corona Stories from Observing the Process. I'm your host, Alex Greenberg. And before we start, I'm hoping you can help me out by supporting the show. You can do this by going to my website, observingtheprocess.com. For just $5 a month or $50 for the year, you can become a monthly supporter. This show relies on listener support to stay on the air. So if you find this content valuable, I hope you will consider subscribing. You can find a link to subscribe in the description of this podcast. If you can't support monthly, no worries. You can help out by rating and reviewing on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. You can share it with your friends, you can blog about it, or discuss it on your own podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you for supporting the show. Listeners like you make it possible. If you are looking for information on how to protect yourself and stay safe from COVID-19, please get information from the CDC or the World Health Organization. Today on the show, I had Donnie, aka the Wonton Don. Donnie is the Asia Barstool correspondent who is based in Shanghai but is currently in South Carolina. Please welcome Donnie, aka the Wonton Don.
In the land of China, people hardly got nothing at all.
No possessions?
And in China, they never go to church.
No religion too?
Or do magic.
Well, it's easy if you try, Nick.
Hey, how are you?
Oh man, perfect entry. I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Doing well. I'm in South Carolina at the moment.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it's pretty boring.
Pretty boring. Sorry, right now I'm just trying to pin this comment. Yeah, hold on a second. Give me one moment.
Yeah, no problem. How many of your followers do you think live in China? And how many do you think just live outside of China but love seeing all of the crazy shit that happens there?
How many live in China? I think not that many live in China because obviously, as you know, we're pretty blocked up in China. But I got a message from someone today. I think a majority are people that have actually lived in China at one point and now they're out and like love to see what's going on, you know?
Oh, true.
What about you?
Now I think the majority are probably from the US and Europe, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So now we're fully ready, starting to get going. You have a little bit of a reverb over there. I don't know what's that, but maybe you could put on headphones or something.
Yeah, I do have a pair of headphones.
That might help out a little bit. Or even as you just got up right there, I don't have the reverb. It might have just been your hand or something.
How is it now?
It's a bit better. All right. So as we get started, so if you could give a brief, I think a lot of people already know who you are, but a brief introduction of who you are, where you're based, what you do for work, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I am the Wonton Don. I've been making videos in China for a while. I was doing that. It wasn't my full-time job, but I was just doing it for fun because I moved out to China and I loved creating comedic content, and I had a friend that loved to film. So we teamed up and we're making videos just as like a side hustle while I worked a bunch of random different jobs in China, just highlighting the absurdity of China, sort of like what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And after doing that for about like 5 years, I eventually got picked up by Barstool Sports. I pitched them on becoming their foreign correspondent. And when they started to expand because they got investment, they finally agreed to bring me on for that role. And so I went back to China and made a lot of videos there. And since then, I've also made content in some other countries too, like Japan, Philippines, Zimbabwe, Tajikistan.
Yeah, cool.
And that's now my full-time job.
Sweet. Yeah, and for people who don't know, Donnie and I did a full Observing the Process podcast. So if you want to know more about him, check that out. It has way more information. He just did a good job of introducing himself. But today, the topic of conversation is coronavirus, Corona Stories. So when and how did you first hear about the coronavirus?
So I was in Shanghai, and around December 19th, I went to Japan. I was going to be there for Christmas. And maybe the day I left or the day I got to Japan, I started seeing some news articles about a new type of viral pneumonia in Wuhan. They weren't really sure what it was. And yeah, I didn't really think about it too much because I feel like every year there's some sort of like weird disease that pops up in China and they don't really know what's going to happen. Like in 2013, there was the bird flu. They thought that was going to be bad, but then nothing really happened. It didn't really spread too far. So I didn't really think anything of it. But then I went back to the US December 28th, and I think it was around that time that China announced they have something serious on their hands. And when did Wuhan go into lockdown?
Wuhan went into lockdown, I would guess early February or late January, because I heard about it first in late January.
Oh, you like heard about the coronavirus for the first time?
Yeah, I was in the States since December, so I wasn't really on top of that. You know what's funny? The first time I heard about the coronavirus was through Flora memes. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
Dude, I thought it was called Flora or something at first. I had no idea it was called the coronavirus. I was just like, what is Flora? Like, is Flora like the infection? Or I was so confused because like, the WeChat, like groups that we're in, like, because China and stuff. I don't know if you're in those, but definitely add you so much funny stuff. They were all like insane amount of Flora memes. I did not understand what was going on at all. And that was my first impression of the coronavirus.
Okay. So yeah, like throughout most of January, I wasn't too concerned about it. I was focused on releasing these videos that I had filmed in Zimbabwe. But then it was actually someone else who works for Barstool Sports. And he was like, he's not a blogger, he's behind the scenes, but he reached out to me and he was like, I don't know if you're following this coronavirus thing, but it would make a solid blog. And that was at the time when there was more and more news articles. So I was like, all right, I'll just blog this and give people an overview of what I know about it. And that was like around the time, I think that was right after Wuhan was put on lockdown. And I actually did a blog about Flora as well, because I saw that shit and found it hilarious. But then it was more real to me because my girlfriend was in Thailand at the time and she was planning on going back to China, like February 3rd. I was going to go back to China around then too. And at first her school was like, yes, we know there's a virus, but we are still going to need you to come back and start teaching. And she was kind of freaking out. She was like, I don't think it's safe to go back. And then 3 days later, her school was like, oh yeah, it's actually pretty serious. And Shanghai is going to be closed till at least February 10th. And then it was like February 19th. So she decided instead of going back to China, she would just come back to the US with me. So yeah, I mean, I was planning on spending all of January in the US, but I was hoping to be back in Shanghai by February 3rd. So for the month of February, I was just like hopping from friends' places. I rented a couple apartments for 2 weeks in New York. I stayed at my parents' place and I was just hopping around, and it was fun because I was seeing all sorts of friends, but it was tough just not having a home, just sleeping in random places every night.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. Life as a content creator, I think that's the broadest term to put you under as a content creator, and you work for Barstool. What was the experience like being in, I think at one point you were talking about like you were in the studio. Were they like joking around with you? Talk a little about that. Like a lot of people think it's really cool that you work at Barstool. So, kind of being in that scene at that time when you can't go back to your home town or your home, which is Shanghai. And I think there was one point where you're talking to Dave Portnoy, like, what am I going to do? Like,
yes. So Portnoy, my boss, was a big non-believer in the coronavirus at first.
Really? I didn't know that.
And he knew that I was planning on going back to China February 3rd, but I'd planned to postpone that trip. And he would always like make fun of me in the office, joking around, being like, oh, are you afraid of the coronavirus and stuff? And I was like, well, I'm not afraid of the coronavirus as much because if I got it, I think I'd survive. but it's more like there's no reason for me to go back to Shanghai because at that point, Shanghai was completely locked down.
Mm.
And another reason I wouldn't have gone back is that my parents would have been pissed because they were following all the news and they were freaking out. So they're like, you better not be going back to China. But it's weird because I'm the one guy at Barstool Sports who actually lives in China. Everybody was walking up to me like I was the coronavirus. I was the expert on it. So it was like, and I wasn't really even paying that close attention, but I had people coming up to me all the time being like, do we need to be worried about it in the US? And I was just like, well, it seems serious in China, but it doesn't seem like there's anything to be afraid of now in the US.
Yeah.
I was surprised there wasn't a single case in New York, even when it did first start to spread in the US.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of thought New York would be one of the first places because you have so many people traveling in and out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, yeah, there's not a single case in New York. I guess we don't have anything to worry about. And they would call me onto radio, and I didn't really have that much to say. I was just like, well, they locked down a city of 11 million people. So it's got to be pretty serious. And they were all like, yeah, I mean, the US would never do that. We would never just shut down a city. And that's pretty much what's happening now.
Yeah, man. I guess it's like pretty telling that it just took a lot longer than expected to hit New York, because now New York is the epicenter of all this, and it just took a lot longer. You were in the Bahamas at one point. Tell me about that. Was that like, at what time did that happen?
So the timing of that trip was hilarious in some respects, because the only reason I went down there is I was getting tired of having to pay out of my own pocket for an Airbnb in New York or just stay at my parents'. And a guy reached out on Twitter and was like, I live in the Bahamas. You know, if you can't go back to China, you should just come down here and stay with me for a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never met him. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to take his word on it and go down there. And the day after I arrived was when the coronavirus really started to spread in the US. And it's when the quarantine started in the US. So I think a lot of my coworkers were a little jealous, maybe kind of frowning upon what I was doing, because right when they were locked in their houses, I was just living it up down in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And I was down there for about 12 days. It wasn't until my last 3 or 4 days that like coronavirus fear started to hit the Bahamas too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the main reason I left. There was talk about they might be shutting down the country, and it would be sweet to get stuck in the Bahamas, but I don't think I'd be able to stay at that guy's house for the next 5 weeks.
Yeah.
So I left the Bahamas on March 21st. And then I quarantined in South Carolina. That's where my girlfriend's from. We eventually found a pretty cheap rental. And since then, I've just been living the quarantine life down here. But it was nice to get I felt like it was like I got a lot done that last week in the Bahamas that made being so cooped up more tolerable, I guess.
Right. Right. Now, this is a question that I ask all of my guests: is your thoughts on the media and how they're handling the situation. For you in particular, it's an interesting question because you are the media in some sense. Like, you create content. You don't create news necessarily like for the general masses, but my general question is about your thoughts on the media and how they're handling the situation and kind of how it relates to our mental health. Because I think for me, the constant bombardment of information is kind of too much at times. I'm wondering how you feel about it.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I talk to my parents, and sometimes it's very clear that they've just been watching the news all day when they sound like super anxious, super nervous. I try not to consume the news that much, but it is weird how it's become almost like a war between the US and China. Just like China is talking a lot of shit about the US is talking a lot of shit about China. And I've realized now when I write some blogs or something, a few of the comments will just be like, fuck China, fuck China. And I think the thing those people need to realize is there's a difference between the Chinese government and Chinese people. Like, I have heard of some cases of racism in the U.S. where just that even if it's a Chinese American, people will yell shit at them if they're walking down the street. And it's like, yeah, you can believe that the Chinese government didn't handle this well. And I think there's a lot of evidence that points towards that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like just the normal everyday people in China had any say in what their government did.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's the same way that most Americans, like, we didn't have a say in how our own government reacted to the virus.
Exactly. I've been seeing so much hate in the comments recently when I post stuff, and it's so upsetting, to be honest. It's like people arguing with each other, like, and most of the time they're on the same side. It's just like the comment section brings out the worst in people. It's pretty sad how much people are. And I think what you said is super important, is like, when I post stuff about how China is handling it, it's like they think I'm attacking Chinese people, and that's not the case whatsoever. Like, you are not the government, and the government is not you. Like, they're separate entities, and I think that's super important to establish.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, and it's created a weird environment where now in China, I've heard there's some Chinese people who are afraid of white people or black people because it's starting to spread so much in the U.S. and Europe. And then in the US, when like the coronavirus first broke out, there was a lot of people who were afraid of Chinese people. There were some people who were like, I'm not going to eat at a Chinese restaurant now.
Yeah, totally. Ridiculous stuff. My next question is, how do you think different cultures are handling the pandemic? You know, here in America, we didn't handle it, I think, as fast as people would have wanted to. And then in China, however, they're able to handle it with like kind of a swift fist. Like, they handled it very quickly. So I'm wondering your thoughts on how different cultures are handling the pandemic, especially since you got to see the Bahamas as well, and you were in China for a bit of it.
Yeah, well, I think it just comes down to, like, in China, whatever the government says goes. And like, the people there are used to the government saying you have to do this, you have to do that, and you don't really have a say. So there probably wasn't as much resistance to the lockdown. But then in the US, we've never had anything like that happen. And like, we're used to our government like not having that much control. Which is like why even now there's a lot of people in the US that are trying to fight the quarantine and go back to work. It's just like, this has never happened, really.
Yeah, did you see how people are protesting it in California?
Yeah.
How ridiculous
is that? They're protesting it all over the country.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. What do you think about people protesting in the streets for that kind of stuff?
It's pretty crazy. Like, obviously, you can kind of see where they're coming from, where they need to go back to work and they're blowing all their savings. But I don't think that's the move. I mean, I just hope there's like some really intelligent scientists that are kind of in charge of making the call.
Yeah. I actually see.
Obviously, I have no idea what's the best course of action.
You know, it's an interesting question. I saw someone post on the internet, like, if a vaccine was out today, would you take it? And I guess the question is like, how much has the vaccine been tested, and like how long has that kind of stuff been in play? Because of course you'd like to say, I guess if it's like approved by top scientists, like, yes, this is safe to take. Sure, I trust top scientists, I'm going to take it. But it was interesting to think, like, if it's like, because vaccines normally take 10 to 15 years to happen. So it's like, if it came out today, a lot of people are going to be skeptical. It's just kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, even when we invent the vaccine, it's going to take, another 6 to 9 months for us to produce enough of it that we can even start to give it to people. I don't know. Like, I have no idea when the U.S. is going to reopen, but the crazy thing is I was going to go back to China right before they closed their borders. And then it'd be right at the time when the U.S. was closing down, China would be reopening. So I almost missed the quarantine completely just by going back and forth from the U.S. and China. I I mean, have you talked to friends in Shanghai? Is life going back to normal there? Because that would give the U.S. hope that we'll be able to go back to normal in a month.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to several friends, and they all say life is basically back to normal. You know, people are wearing masks. There's a lot of regulation at transportation, like metro and stuff like that. But overall, it's definitely back to normal, which is crazy. Like, I guess it's not crazy, but it's hopeful, as you said. It's like it could happen sooner or later. What about you? Have you talked to people that are still back there?
Yeah, I've talked to some people, and they say they're going back to bars and restaurants, which is nice. I definitely missed that. But I also talked to my friend who lived in Guangzhou, and he was telling me about all the drama that happened there because 2 Nigerians tested positive for coronavirus.
Yeah.
So then they started cracking down on all black people in the city.
Yeah, I posted an article about that, and people went crazy. That's the article I'm kind of referring to. Is I posted just kind of the facts of what happened, and then people are getting upset, like, make sure you cover both sides, and it's like there's only so much news I can post about, but yeah, that's kind of the situation. It's interesting to think that I also saw that opportunity. It was like March 28th was the day that they decided to stop letting foreigners in. I saw that opportunity that I could go back, but I thought it was like kind of a rash decision to jump there so quickly. You know, I would have had like 24 hours to get on the next plane and get there and hope it worked out.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of when they're going to reopen their borders?
You know, I talked to someone, and apparently in mid-May, they're going to start letting extremely high consulate members, you know, government officials from like external countries back in. That was like a maybe of what might happen. So I'm hoping by mid-May, they'll give at least an update to the situation on when they will let people back into China. That's what I'm hoping. Because, I mean, as soon as they open back up, I would go directly back. What about you?
Yeah, I would go back just because I was actually planning on moving back to the U.S. in the fall. So I was really looking forward to have this whole spring and summer just to say goodbye to Shanghai.
Dude, that was my exact plan as well, is like to just have one final hurrah this summer. I was getting ready to kind of move back to the States. Like that's my potential plan. And I was really hoping to like enjoy traveling around China and, you know, kind of seeing all that stuff. But
exactly.
Yeah. So I guess we'll see. All right, man. So we're coming in on 20 minutes. So I think now is a good time to go to the questions from the fans, and we can kind of see what they have to ask. Let me pull up a question. Do you guys have a YouTube channel? I accidentally clicked on that one. From Nicole. Yes, I have a YouTube channel. Donnie also has a YouTube channel. You can find me at Shanghai Observe. If you search that. Donnie, what's your YouTube channel?
It's the Wonton Don on YouTube.
Word. Let's go to this question from Warhorse. Have you heard from Huai? Can you see the questions, by the way, Donnie?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. So have you heard from Huai?
I have heard from Huai. She's fine. I have another IE too that I've been using more than Huai. Now I just use Huai when I'm filming a video because she's a star in front of the camera. And she's gone Hollywood on me. But it's got to be a little tough on these IEs because a lot of them, all of the houses that they clean for, it's a lot of foreigners, and a lot of foreigners aren't in China at the moment. So they're probably losing a lot of income. But both of my IEs I've talked to are fine. I also talked to Peng Zai, the Drinking King of China. He's fine too.
That's awesome. Have you been doing a series with Peng Zai? Like I saw bits and pieces of you posting about that. What's up with that?
Yeah, we've been doing a cross-cultural drinking show to help raise money for COVID-19 relief. And it was actually Peng Zai reached out to me and he was like, hey, it looks like coronavirus is bad in the US right now. I'd love to raise some money and help. So I thought of the idea of us doing a drinking show because that's what we both enjoy doing. And so far, it's been good. We've raised some money. I think it helps kind of cool relations between U.S. and China. And the drinking show was featured in like the official newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party.
That's amazing.
Which was pretty funny. Yeah.
All right, let me definitely share that in the coming day. I think that's cool what you said. It's like it is a relationship building thing, like a Chinese citizen and American citizen kind of cooperating in a drinking competition. That's awesome. I'm gonna repost that. Show some love.
Yes, it's called Zillion Pijos.
Zillion Pijos. All right, for people listening, go search that, and you can see it on my channel in a couple days. I'll post some links. Next question: why do you always wear shades?
So I wore shades. It started when I thought I would eventually have to find a real job. And so I was like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't completely reveal my identity when I'm filming these vids. I also think I had a black eye when I filmed the first video I did. So I was trying to hide that as well. And then it just sort of stuck with the persona. Yeah, now sometimes I'll take the shades off and people are like, whoa, I'm so used to seeing you with shades. That's so fucking weird. So I have no idea. Kind of like, yeah, it started just because I was like, if I need to find a real job back in the US, I don't have tons of employers being like, oh, you're that psychopath out in China.
Dude, I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it just stuck with the persona. I'll see. Maybe eventually I'll move out of them. If you look at some of my older videos, I'm not wearing the shades in all of them.
Yeah, I personally love them. I think it is a part of your identity, and it's a cool story. So the next question is from Cooper. What's the strangest Chinese food that you found surprisingly good?
I don't mind century eggs. Those are those black eggs. They just, I don't know. They've been aged underground. They turn sort of black and green. I thought they looked like the grossest thing ever. Yeah. But in small doses and like on top of dishes, they're actually not bad.
Yeah, I call them like the 1,000-year-old eggs, and they're like black with and it's like green goo on the inside. It's looks really strange, but they're really good, and they usually have some like spice on it. For people who don't know, I don't know what the real name is, but we just call them like 1,000-year-old eggs. People can Google that and see what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that is the real egg. I think that's the real name. That's what the Chinese call it too.
Cool.
And I got to give a quick shout out to raw horse. I had that in Japan. That's probably one of the weirdest foods that tasted incredible.
Yeah, I've had raw horse as well. Like it's just sashimi, horse sashimi.
Yeah.
I had that in northern Japan, and it just tasted like normal sashimi. It was really good. Yeah, I would have thought that would have been gnarly as well. Have you ever had brains?
Yeah, I've had pig brains and lamb brains, I think.
Yep. I've had that as well, and it kind of just tastes like tofu. It's not that crazy.
Yeah, or scrambled eggs.
Yeah, right. Okay, next question from Jake. Donnie, are you still cranking hoons, or did you switch to vaping?
I will still crank the occasional hoon, but I have been vaping. But I feel like I've gotten more hooked on vaping than I ever was on hoons.
Really?
Because even when I'm at work in the barstool office, they don't mind if you're sitting at your desk and vaping. And like back when I would smoke cigarettes, you would at least have to walk outside to smoke a cigarette. But with vaping, you can literally just sit and do it all day. So it's becoming a problem, but I think it's still healthier than smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that the downside, like you would think at first taking up vaping is going to help with your cigarette smoking, and it might, but then it also gives you the opportunity to smoke inside, which makes it actually a lot more difficult.
Exactly.
All right. Here's the next one from Matthew. Do you feel wearing masks in public will be more common in the US in the future, like Asian countries? And for me, I was actually thinking and talking to someone about this the other day. And I definitely think it's going to be weird. I think masks are going to be like kind of a new norm. I think that people are going to like start to use them, and it's weird because I was talking to someone about body language and how much of like facial expressions we use to communicate. And if we're not using masks, or if we are using masks, it's going to change things up.
Yeah, I definitely think they're going to be more common in the US. Obviously, people were using them in China because of the smog, but I've always been confused why in Japan, where the smog isn't that bad, so many people wear masks. And is that because just everyone in Japan is a germaphobe. I've been so confused because more people wear masks in Japan than in China, where like in Japan, they don't even have to worry about the air quality.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a cultural thing in terms of like being a germaphobe. I don't think that's the reason, but I think like that's the closest reason I could get to it is because, you know, in general, like they don't shake hands in Japan. They bow, and it's more of like a form of respect, and I guess in a sense. I'm just speculating. That's just my guess. But I mean, you've been to Japan, right? Like, you know how people like are very polite, and it's more of a form of respect, I would guess, if I had to guess.
Yeah. I was going to be at the Tokyo Olympics until they got canceled. Like I'd already booked a place. I think I will be able to get a refund on that, but that really sucks. It was going to be my first Summer Olympics that I've been at.
Damn, that would have been some dope content. Well, I mean, I guess they're going to only postpone it 1 year, so you can still go, I guess, in another year. But yeah, that's a huge thing that Japan did by canceling the Olympics. Yeah, they obviously didn't want to do that, but that's unprecedented. I don't know the last time they ever canceled an Olympics.
Yeah, it sucks.
That's pretty wild. From Ryan, how the fuck did you sneak into that Pacquiao fight a few years ago?
I saw some really important looking people, and I just followed them into an elevator, and it took me down to the ground floor. And then I just walked down the alleyway that leads to the ring that the fighters walk down. And then someone was like, "Hey, you got to get out of the alleyway." So I moved a fence. And then when I got to the other side of the fence, I was pretty much in the front row. And I think the reason no one told me to fuck off was because I was wearing an all green suit. So they were like, "Oh, this guy must be somewhat important if he's just wearing a green suit." So yeah, I was like watching a fight right next to Pacquiao's family.
Yeah. For people who want to hear more about that story, I know you told me on our podcast that we did. So y'all can check it out there. We're going to take a couple more questions, and I know Donnie has to wrap it up. This one I liked. Are there any Chinese beers that you can find in the States that you'd recommend?
Not really. To be like, they have Tsingtao in the U.S., and I do recommend that beer. Apparently, though, it's a different brewery that makes those. So the Tsingtaos in the U.S. don't taste the same as the Tsingtaos in China. But I think the ones in the U.S. might actually taste a bit better.
Yeah, I haven't had Qingdao in the States, but it's definitely one of my favorite like cheap Chinese beers that I would recommend if you can find. It's spelled like TIS something Qingdao. I wouldn't know how to spell it necessarily.
TISINGTAO.
There you go, Qingdao. You kind of covered this one a little bit. After living in Shanghai, Donnie, how do you feel about how China is represented at the moment? If you want to maybe retouch on that one for Andy.
Yeah, I feel like I already touched on it. There's like right now, obviously China is not represented well in the US, but people need to realize that's just the Chinese government that living in China.
You cut out there for a second. What was that you said?
Yeah, no, it's just the same thing. Like China is obviously not represented well in the US. Their government may have made some pretty shitty decisions around the virus. It's hard to tell. I have no idea what they're doing. They may have lied about the number of people who died. They may have tried to cover it up at first, but that doesn't reflect on the everyday Chinese people. They're just people like you and me living their life, trying to make a living.
Right. Exactly. That's a good way to state that. Okay, so for the last question, I don't know the answer to this one. Where did the "Hey, how are you" come from?
Hey, how are you is just a very common greeting in Massachusetts. I'm from the South Shore, and I was back in Mass last month, and it's funny because when I'm in China, I'm the only person who is saying, "Hey, how are you?" But when you're walking down the street there, I don't even have to say it. Like someone, before I can say a word, someone's like, "Oh, hey, how are you?" And then the most common response to that is good and you.
Good and you. Yeah.
So it's not even like when you say, hey, how are you? It's like you don't even really want to know how they're doing. You just expect them to be like, good and you. It's not like, oh, hey, how are you? And you're like, well, I'm actually not doing so good.
Yeah,
and then you go on like a rant about all your problems.
It's I think I've seen this like in not like translation videos, but it's like if you're teaching English to someone in Chinese who speaks Chinese, you're gonna say like in Chinese they say ni hao, but like we say hello, hey, how are you doing? That doesn't. They have to go and explain to the students like that doesn't actually mean you're gonna go out and tell them how you feel, like how's your day going. It's actually funny to explain that to someone who like doesn't know the culture behind it.
Exactly.
Okay, Donnie, thank you so much for your time. As we start to wrap up, what do you got going on for the rest of the day? What else is going on?
Not much. So when I first got back to South Carolina, I was fine with just taking it easy, finally be living in one place. But I don't know, like if this goes until June, I'm probably going to start going a little stir crazy in 2 weeks. I need to do something because there are some activities you can do safely during quarantine. Like even if it's just going camping or something like that. I need to get out of the house, but I'm also blessed to be in South Carolina where they have open fields. Like my girlfriend knows someone here who, has a large house with a huge yard and some guns. So I went shooting guns for the first time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I have it better than people who are quarantined in Manhattan. And like the most they can do is maybe walk around their block once a day.
Yeah.
So I don't have it too bad, but yeah, like obviously I want to get back to Shanghai. I want to see friends up in Massachusetts. So I'll just be hunkering down here, I guess, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky as well. I mean, like I'm in New York, but I'm in Long Island, so I have the beaches I can go to. They're not closed yet, so I can go surfing, which has been really nice.
Nice.
Of my saving grace. To be honest, if I didn't have surfing, I would be going very stir crazy.
Surfing's like that's the perfect quarantine activity.
Yeah, it's great.
I've always wondered if salt water like helps the virus not spread too. Is that true?
That's an interesting question. I read an article that says the exact opposite, but I don't believe it. It was from this reporter, like this person who I saw one article from her. She is a doctor, but I think it was kind of like nonsense. It was this article from Scripps, which is a hospital out in California. Yeah, man, I think the verdict is in the air. I don't know about that. Either way, I've been fine. I've been surfing for the past like 2 months, going in the water, and I've been fine. Haven't gotten it. So I would say that's enough evidence for me.
True.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks for having me on. And if you hear anything about the borders opening back up in China, let me know, and I'll probably see you out there.
Absolutely. I'll keep you posted, bud. Take care.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
Peace.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to a live episode of Observing the Process with the Wonton Don. That's a wrap. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye now. Boom. That's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast valuable, there are many ways you can support it. The best way is by going to my website, observingtheprocess.com. For just $5 a month or $50 for the year, you can become a monthly supporter. This show relies on listener support to stay on the air. So if you find this content valuable, I hope you will consider subscribing. You can find a link to subscribe in the description of this podcast. If you can't support monthly, no worries. You can help out by rating and reviewing on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. You can share it with your friends, you can blog about it, or discuss it on your own podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you for supporting the show. Listeners like you make it possible. If you are looking for information on how to protect yourself and stay safe from COVID-19, please get information from the CDC or the World Health Organization. Also, if you enjoyed the intro and outro music, it was made by my brother, Donnie Greenberg. You can go and check out his beats on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, or SoundCloud. He goes by the name Estoric, ESTORIC. All right, that's it for now.